Our next speaker needs really no introduction. You've all probably heard of him before and probably heard him before. So I'm just going to say thank you to Donald Clark. Over to you, Donald.
Okay. Just while the guy switches my thing on, I had a year last year when I was playing with loads of this stuff. Google Glass, Oculus Rift, MOOCs. I actually had some semantic technique, all sorts of projects. I had a year of playing, just as you said with. The Google Glass thing was interesting because, like Dave, I think its application is in vocational practical learning, that hands-free thing. I'm not, when I live in Brighton, I was fearing for my life sometimes walking up the main street in Brighton with my Google Glass on. I had to default to Lewis, a quieter English market town, and trying it out. I think I was talking to my colleague from Scotland up there. I think the true test of Google Glass would be to walk the whole length of Sauchiehall Street with Google Glass. If you can get to the end, it passes the consumer test for me. Sorry, just came up the wrong slide there. At the end of every year, last year I said I played around with loads of this stuff, and I blog a lot. And if you're a blogger, people usually often ask you, can you give us your predictions for 2015? So I played with this huge array of stuff, okay? And I don't like the term futurologist. I think I'm more of an archaeologist. I like looking backwards to see what's worked rather than just second guessing what's going to work in the future. And as I look back over 2014 and all the stuff that I was using, there were two things I'll forget one. The one big one, though, for my prediction, last year I did a prediction, and my main prediction was that one of the Rolling Stones would die. Those guys have got resilience. So, they're just going to go on forever. I'm never going to get that one right. But the 2015 for me was actually one big thing which really hit me home. So much so that I wrote 2 big checks of my own money to invest in a company that specializes in adaptive learning based on AI techniques. And you may think this is a bit abstruse, has nothing to do with you. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to also bring Andy Wooler here, who is a real global LMS guy. He's been in the industry as long as me, who's using this stuff in anger. So to relate it back to your real world, we'll get some real hard-headed empirical evidence to what we're talking about here. In Davos, just last week, Robert Shiller, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, made a very interesting point about AI. He said that artificial intelligence has already hollowed out working-class, unskilled jobs. Robots have, in manufacturing, replaced lots of those jobs that historically people used to do, real people. And he says, beware, because the next big wave, speaking as an economist, will be the hollowing out of the middle class and the hollowing out of decision makers. And if you don't think this is happening, think again, because there is hardly a serious, and this is a Nobel Prize-winning economist who doesn't believe that that will happen to some degree. It's only a matter of degree. There are others who are a bit more fearful. Mr. Stephen Hawking is one, and Elon Musk, the guy who's building rockets, Tesla cars, and so on, a real entrepreneur, who think that we are very close to some weird iRobot future. I don't know. I bought one of these Hoover, these sort of Hoover things. I don't think in my life we're going to have robots wandering around the conference telling us what to do, to be frank. But there's something more prosaic and interesting for you guys in all this. I don't know if you've seen this movie, Her. How many people saw this last year? I was absolutely astonished at this. It was a sort of Turing test type movie. And you sit in the cinema and you cannot help be seduced by that notion of this guy falls in love with an AI or a woman on a computer, and Pete Dong in the end, as it were. Fantastic movie. But it gave you a glimpse of how convincing even quite primitive bits of software can be in terms of pretending to be human beings. But the one I really recommend is this. How many people have seen Ex Machina? I highly recommend this. This is a serious movie. And Alex Garland, who did The Beach and 28 Days Later, got serious AI and philosophical experts in this area as script advisors, and it tells. If you want to really get to grips with what AI really means, watch this movie. Absolutely fantastic experience. But remember, the AI thing isn't just new. It hasn't sprung up out of nowhere. We have had 2,000 years of build-up to the eventual production of algorithms and what we would call adaptive learning. Going back, Euclid was the first person to come up with algorithms, and didn't invent them certainly, but certainly defined what they were. There's people like Aristotle who looked at the syllogism of arguments, which became philosophical logic, which then became mathematical logic. Descartes, the mechanical view of the mind, that the mind is a machine. And this is where the word algorithm comes from, Al-Khwarizmi, an Arab scholar who actually came up with the whole concept, redefined mathematics in terms of algorithms. Then there's a whole load of, right through Bernoulli, Pascal, right through to Bayes, the guys who really brought probability and mathematics into the equation. So this doesn't come from nowhere. We've had 2,000 years of probability thinking, mathematics, philosophical thinking about how this works. People have been building up to this for a long time. Why has it taken so long? Well, the first big event, I was born in 1956, and in that year, the same year that Elvis launched Heartbreak Hotel, significant event in my life, I love rock and roll. That year, 1956, in Dartmouth, I went to this university, it's an Ivy League place in the States, and I went there when I was 19. And in this place, the modern era of artificial intelligence started. And these guys got together, they were the real dream team who were working on this sort of stuff at the time. Then it took, in 1956 up to the late 80s and 90s, it was quite slow progress. And it wasn't slow progress on the maths and the probability, it was slow on delivery. Then the web comes along. And suddenly, this is like a huge infusion of data. The artificial intelligence people, who have algorithms, suddenly had masses of data to work with. So if you're working in machine learning, where you need lots of data so that the machine learns faster, the World Wide Web suddenly supplied this flood of data. And we've had this absolute explosion of activity since the year 2000. The Google era, let's call it, okay? Because Google is nothing but an AI machine. It's nothing but a bunch of algorithms. One of the biggest companies in the world, and that's all it is. So don't imagine that you're not involved in this world, and don't imagine that Google is not a pedagogic technique used by every single one of your learners and you personally. It's been the biggest pedagogic shift I've witnessed in my lifetime. And it's nothing but a bunch of algorithms. So it's here now, that's starting to work. And if you're interested in some background reading on this, I won't bore you with all this stuff. This is really interesting, this Moneyball thing, a really light read on how that algorithmic data approach was applied to sport. There's some really good stuff in here as well. I don't know if you remember this book. This one in particular has about 5 or 6 major educational and learning examples in it. And these are quite readable books on how algorithms really do come to bear. Predictive analytics is all about algorithms predicting the future, and then the famous big data book. There's some right nice text here. If you want a short, I've actually got short form reviews and summaries of all these books on the Cogbooks website. I'll give you that URL later if you don't want to read all 6 or 8 of those books. Interesting confirmation of what happened here as well, DeepMind. DeepMind was started by a guy from the games industry. He was very famous, called Demis Hassabis. He was a sort of, a child prodigy, chess champion. He won every single competition he ever used to go into. He eventually designed some very famous games, then came out and went into academia. And he did a PhD on learning theory, on memory theory. And he wrote a seminal paper on memory. He discovered that in the hippocampus, when you get damage in the hippocampus, you lose your memories, okay? You lose some episodic memories, serious loss of memories. But you also lose your ability to predict the future. You use your ability to plan. And what he discovered was that actually memory is linked to the imagination. So that when you're designing your learning, what you have, that's why all this storytelling stuff really matters, the scene setting, you really have to be very clever in terms of long-term memory in what's traditionally called elaboration, and making sure that you scene set and contextualize stuff if it's really going to be remembered. Then he left academia, he's a smart kid this, started a company. 2 years later, DeepMind was sold to Google for $628 million. Well over $500 million. And all he has is a bunch of algorithms. That's all he did, he just sat and wrote them. And these algorithms are super smart. The system he has, you can place them in front of a game, it learns the rules of the game, and it beats the best players in the game. It was such an astounding breakthrough. It astonished the AI community. And this is a geekish looking Demis, but that's it. And remember, this is not necessarily about mimicking what the human mind does. There's a great mistake in thinking that AI or adaptive learning should actually just take up the neural networks of what the brain does and copy it in some way. We didn't learn to fly by studying birds in a great, the model for flying technically was not the flapping of wings. Actually, the model for flying was fixed wing, high-end technology and engines that push the things forward, or a propeller that pulls it that came from ship technology. So, don't imagine this is about mimicking the brain necessarily. It's about doing new and different things. And there's a salutary lesson in that one. I mentioned Google already. It's not just that smartness that is completely invisible, like, the bottom half of the iceberg, really. That's where all the action is in Google. It's painfully simple at the front. But when you type in those words in Google, you get the drop-down menus. Even that, you can see the algorithms work in action. Just as you type every letter, trillions of calculations taking place in a fraction of a second. That's the power of this stuff. And I want to explore how that might be useful in learning. Right. The other one is Facebook. If you use Facebook, you will be subject to their algorithms, because every ad that pops up there, it will annoy you. But I'm okay with targeted ads. I'd much rather have ads that are targeted to me than ads that are targeted to young children or women or other demographic groups. I'm cool with that. I'm using this for free. I'm in their living room. I don't mind the ads. I'd much rather they were targeted than non-targeted. But there are other areas that may affect some of your lives. An online dating. If you use eHarmony and several other sites, then you will, if you go for the higher end service, be filling in questionnaires. And there are incredibly smart people working on incredibly smart algorithms, which I think are worthy things, trying to match you with a partner. This is based on past success. So these guys already have hundreds of thousands of people who have used the service. They know which profiles lead to long-term relationships and indeed marriage, which they track. Long-term relationships of one form or another, and then they start using that to try and match you with somebody in the future. I think that's okay. I think it's a lot better than that random process that I remember when I was 19 of thrashing around on the dance floor in weird pubs and nightclubs. Maybe a bit of maths could do us all a bit of good here. And in sport, if you like football, this is a great book, this one. There's this amazing book also on how algorithms, data, AI is used not only, that Manchester City have 13 full-time data analysts and mathematicians. 13 mathematicians on their books. So when they buy a player, training regimes, tactics, the examination of the team, massive amount of data. The data is inert and dead in itself. The clever thing about data is how you use it through the formula that give you answers to your queries. There's a brilliant one in this book from Marino. Marino, when he came to England, was really puzzled as to why all the English fans used to clap every time the team got a corner. Because Marino was a data guy, and he knew that corners hardly ever lead to goals. English fans are obsessed by corners, he said. Nobody in the rest of the world, nobody ever claps. Corners are a waste of time, and statistically that's true. It doesn't tend to lead to goals. Other areas in retail here, if you use Amazon, you will have been in the AI world already. Almost everything that comes up on Amazon. It knows what books you've not bought. It knows what other sites you've gone to look at for books. That not buying the book is a really important thing with regard to its own algorithms. And you reckon over a third now of Amazon sales come from the recommendation engine. And I'm glad it recommends me books. I really am, because often they are the right books, the ones that I do go on to buy. This is a weird example. This company actually goes back to Roger. Anybody heard of Roger Schenck at all? Well, Roger's a sort of big, serious learning guy, great guy. And it was one of his students, actually, a PhD student, who wrote this bit of software for writing sports stories in journalism. And what it did, it went to the weather reports, it went to the stats, all the stats about the players, and it automatically wrote a narrative sports report for a newspaper on the software. Then they tested it against real journalists, and people couldn't tell the difference. In fact, they were starting to like the computer-driven thing because it was really accurate. It never made a mistake. It had certain narrative structures. They now sell it for $10 every 100 words and syndicate it quite often. You will, I don't know about the UK and the US, if you read baseball stories, they will have been produced by a computer, but you don't know. There's some interesting things happening here. How many people have got Netflix? What's happening here? Netflix had $1 million prize. 2 young kids won that $1 million prize. All they wanted was a couple of algorithms that gave them the recommendation engine that would drive sales up, and boy did it work. Boy did it work. These guys used to sell like videotapes out of cardboard boxes, now one of the biggest companies in the entertainment media, and it's not just the recommendation engine. About 75% of their sales come from the recommendation engine. They actually analyze your behavior when you watch House of Cards, scene by scene, so they have huge amounts of data about when people drop out, so they know the crap scenes and the crap, they know what's going wrong in storytelling and fiction. That is then fed back to the scriptwriters for the next version of House of Cards. Isn't that weird? I think that's okay. Why not? You know, it's what scriptwriters had to do intuitively. They're just getting a bit more sense in it now. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this coming in. Let's switch to adaptive learning for a moment. I don't think there's anything wrong with it coming into the learning world. I don't think there's anything wrong with seeing maths sometimes replacing what some teachers do. I was a school governor in a comprehensive school, and I did loads of classroom observations. And if you imagine that teachers are not, we're all human beings, we know we all have cognitive biases. We all have cognitive biases. And we know through research that gender, race, colour, and social background bias is endemic in the teaching world. We know this because girls in the UK hardly ever choose maths and physics as A-level choices, and that guidance is normally coming from teachers who almost inadvertently steer a gender bias into the decision-making process. We know that this is true. The research is really clear on this stuff because other countries don't suffer as badly from it, so it's not a predetermined genetic thing in any way. So you do have a chance here on all these things. You know, they never get tired or irritable. Believe me, teachers do get tired and irritable, and I don't blame them, given the stresses that they're under in terms of government policies and so on. You have algorithms certainly doing things that brains cannot do. Algorithms in a fraction of a second can beat the best chess player in the world. They can interpret data in a fraction of a second. Most teachers in a standard comprehensive school will not have the stats to go anywhere near. They will know absolutely nothing apart from maths teachers about standard deviation, distribution curves, and the sort of thing you might need to know to interpret data accurately. So there are lots of areas of teaching. I'm not saying it's replacing teaching. I think there are areas where it does a better job. Okay? This is an interesting quote. You quite often get this from Future. I was in Berlin, and there was a guy who was a stand-up comedian, stood up, called himself a futurist, and this was his first slide. My heart sinks when I see this slide. You must have seen it a million times. You know, that Watson, the head of IBM, I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. That's by Watson. It wasn't actually Watson, the IBM, the guy never even said it, to be honest. It's one of those mythical things that only exist in training slides. It's absolutely true, he never said it. It was completely made up, and it became one of those memes, you know, that then carried on like that. You remember 10% of what you hear, 20%. That's all bullshit as well, by the way. Complete bullshit. Nevertheless, funnily enough, it's actually come true, because now with cloud computing, you do actually have Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. It's actually coming down to 5 big players controlling the whole shebang. Funnily enough, it's almost accidentally coming true. But this is an important point, because IBM in particular are the people who are a wee bit ahead of the game here. They have built a thing called Watson, which was called after the guy, the CEO of IBM, who was also a bit of an evil bugger, to be honest. He also built the Holderlith machine, which was sold to Hitler. And this was an LMS, which a punch card system, which was used by Hitler and his gang to stamp your race, colour, nationality, and skills. And that data was used to determine whether people went to the death camps or not. So it's not an idle thing, some of this stuff. Be suspicious of some of this stuff as well. You've always got to have that. Who's in control of this data? Nevertheless, the machine in the middle beat the 2 world champions. These guys had been winning millions of dollars in Jeopardy, and it beat them hands down. A machine. That was a real breakthrough. IBM now have Watson, taken it to the next level, and are selling the AI services back out to the market to companies like yours. If you don't think decision-making in the middle classes is going out the window, think again. Think again. These machines are starting to do things in medicine and business decision-making, financial decision-making, that trump human. You know that, write a report, it takes 3 weeks. We've all been there. Maybe that's best done by something that really knows the data and can write it better. So let's turn to adaptive learning, because a traditional course will be this is a chunk of a mathematics course here on differentiation. Normally when this is taught in a university or in school, it's a pretty linear process. That's why maths teaching is so bloody awful, because most of the kids just hit a pitfall, and if they don't get it, it's catastrophic thereafter. They just fall into a pit. And I've taught those kids, it really is not the way to do this subject. What you really have to do is work out what all the dependencies are. You need to know about numbers and equality before you do equations. You need to know this before you go here, that before you go there. There's a whole list of well mapped out dependencies here. That's not how we write e-learning though. We just write e-learning page after page after page and articulate in a linear fashion with a couple of remedial loops. It ain't enough. What you've got to do is treat your knowledge as a network of objects, and the learners have to vector through that network in the order that suits them, because they're all slightly different in terms of their prerequisite knowledge, okay? So it's not this one-size-fits-all, here's my course, we just slam it out. And that is the model in e-learning, universities, colleges, and schools. Whatever people say, that is still the core model. The truth of the matter is we can have a truly personalized system in adaptive learning, and how do we do this? Well, the traditional system is just delivering these learning objects one by one, like bullets out of a machine gun. The truth of the matter is you have to have a network of these things and then follow through in the appropriate path for the individuals, okay? The brain is a network, and actually, because the brain's a network, we should not be, the brain does not memorize things in a linear fashion like a videotape. It doesn't memorize things in terms of a hierarchy. It doesn't remember things in terms of an alphabetic order. And yet we deliver linear learning to brains all the time. We don't deliver a sort of network or web of things where brains can choose and make the appropriate choices next, or the software makes that choice for them. And some of the early data that's coming out of these adaptive systems shows not only that the students who are using the adaptive systems perform better, you get less dropout. It's an interesting thing, this. Why would you think there's less dropout? One of the reasons is that the learners themselves become aware of their own learning, this metacognition. They know that the system is actually personalized to them. Most of the reason for people being bored shitless in e-learning is it knows that it's a compulsory, dull, single road that you have to travel on. I did a Room 101 thing, and Norman, I put, what would you put in your Room 101 in learning? And Norman came up with a great one, which is, in those compliance courses when you come up with 3 pictures of Peter, Shirley, and Ahmed, and they've got a little speech bubble, and you have to click on all 3 to find out what their views of equality in the workplace are, and you listen to the audio files and you go, that's condescending crap. And it was absolutely brilliant observation, that linear, you must listen to these 3 fictional characters that some child has written. I'm 50 years old, I don't need this. The truth of the matter is, if it's not personalized, the way to get out of this trap is to start personalizing the learning. And this is already happening. Some projects have been involved in, both of these. Citizens Maths for maths, sort of functional maths, for those kids who are not going to university, who need maths to go into a practical skills thing, powered by an adaptive engine. This is free and online on computer science from OCR, powered by an adaptive engine, because these topics need to be taught in such a way that they're personalized for those learners who have difficulties with those abstract concepts. This guy up in Edinburgh, who in academia I think is the leading light on this front, Jeff Haywood, brilliant 1-hour lecture on the future of universities, is using adaptive learning with his master's students. So we're getting somewhere with this stuff. Anyway, this is a good point because I'm running out of time anyway. Let me bring one of the experts up, because I want to relate some of that more abstract stuff that I've been putting across to you and show how it might relate to you and your company or your organization. So Andy has been, how many years have you been in this industry, Andy?
As many as you, I think.
30 odd.
I first met you 15 years ago.
Yeah, so, and I've known Andy for a long time, but this guy's a real practitioner, has done nothing but implement high-end global LMS systems, produce content, and so on. I just pass the ball over because I think Andy will give you a sort of real empirical feel for what it's like to use this stuff.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Don. One quick thing I will do, quick plug. My role is the technology manager for the Hitachi Data Systems Academy. But if you want to know about robotics that Don was suggesting isn't pretty close, go to hitachi.com and do a search. And I wish I was prepared enough to have this for you, but we've done some amazing work with robotics in Japan. But back to the point here. I've got a very enlightened boss at Hitachi, and he's had this vision for a long, long time of the concept of the never-ending assessment. And it aligns very closely with my sort of long-held view that we should be aiming towards continuous learning. In other words, kill the course. Kill this concept that it starts here, finishes there, and we're going to test you, and we're going to record that score in an LMS. And the dawn of these adaptive learning tools has enabled us to start to do this now, and we are using these tools live and in anger, and as of now, all of our new web-based training courses will be adaptive. So Storyline is dying a death for us. and all those other tools that we have been using up till now. Sadly, not for compliance courses. We need to terminate a few compliance officers before we could even think about doing the job properly there. But the concept is, and where this starts from for us in writing an adaptive learning course is very, very different to writing a WBT. And this all starts with the learning objectives. And for each learning objective for the course, we have to write a number of probing questions. And that in itself is a technique that people have had to really learn to do properly, because in our WBTs we don't do that. We do this nonsense that Don was referring to earlier. You know, click on this one, click on this one. Four questions, and one of which is obviously the right one. And these probes then are presented to the learners. And at that point, we don't just ask them what's the answer. We also ask them what level of confidence they have in their answer. So we're also looking to understand unconscious incompetence as well during this process. Because it's great that somebody gets a question right, but if somebody gets a question wrong and they're convinced they were right, that tells us something a little bit different as well. And the algorithms behind the tool we're using bring all this into account. And then, as a result of these probes, you are delivered content to resolve the gap that we believe you have. But it doesn't just stop there. Once you've completed all of the probes on the learning objectives, the course doesn't stop. We have a refresh button. You're expected to go back, and periodically you will be randomly retested on the probes using different questions. We're not going to throw the same thing back at them. Looking to deal with the problem of memory degradation, because in our business you may go on the course for an HDS XYZ machine, but not install one for 6 months. So we're needing to keep our guys really on top of their game through this. So we are constantly probing them. The course never ends, and the view that the student will have moving forwards of their position in all of their learning will be a dashboard that says, this is where you are on the scale right now. And if you go in a month's time and you do the refresh and you're not getting the same sort of score, it will change at that point in time. Now, ultimately, this will lead to all of these probes also being linked to competencies or skills, and we will start to be measuring the impact of the training that way rather than the traditional school-based approach. So we've got 4 courses live already. We see it as the future. There are obviously occasions we're not going to be able to use it. We are a certified professional body as well. We run the Hitachi certified program. Trying to get that kind of thing done using an adaptive approach will probably never happen, because that is, once again, it's a bit like compliance, isn't it? You've got to pass the test, you've got to tick the boxes. So that kind of stuff will still be done using prometric testing centres, as we've always done, same as Microsoft do. But everything else that we deliver, that we design, is going to be adaptive learning. And just one caveat there, we are not part of HR and L&D, we are part of the worldwide marketing team. We focus on products, technical skills and sales skills. The L&D agenda is something different. I don't know whether we'll ever bring them on board with this kind of thinking, but it's sadly not within our remit to do so. But we've got enough to focus on training our customers, partners, and sales staff. But this is real adaptive learning in action. The company we're using is one of 3 or 4, and Don's obviously involved in one of these as well. This is not new. The company we've been working with, Area 9, have been heavily involved in the world of academia for a number of years. Their biggest customer, McGraw-Hill, recently bought out their educational side. But they are now focusing on the corporate world, because this is really, really early days for people in our sort of roles. We love it, the students love it. First of all, because they've gone away from the 1-week sheep dip, that's gone. The awful series of WBTs have gone. They are being delivered the content they actually need, which they like. It's a shorter process for them. Bearing in mind we do take in a lot of already skilled people from our competitors, normal kind of stuff. You just don't really want to to pee them off by just sheep dipping them through the same stuff you do with a newbie. So the evidence so far from our users is they love the way we're going with this thing. And yeah, and I'm hoping by June, Donald and I will be hopefully able to do a much more comprehensive presentation on this with a bit more preparation, because I didn't know about this till about 7:10 this morning when I got up.
I contacted him on Twitter saying, this morning, can you do this?
And to have some screenshots and everything, and to be able to show you exactly what this looks like in real life, because we are doing it. This isn't just blue sky stuff.
Thank you very much. I apologize if this is by way of a plug, but I founded an adaptive learning company in Dublin in 2007, and it's called Realise It.
I recognise you now.
Thank you very much. And we've had, just as your example, we've had considerable success, particularly in the United States, where we're involved heavily with a lot of the major universities involved in adaptive learning. We have hundreds of thousands of students now, and interesting to your point, and to the point I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your name, to the point the other speaker made, there's a breakdown of the boundary of seat and time. There's certainly, we have heavily invested in the underlying algorithms and heavily invested in the notion of continuous learning. And I think it's this breaking of these boundaries, and I think this is becoming extremely interesting. If you wish to look it up, you'll see it on our website. The website is called realiseitlearning.com. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's an interesting observation this in the US, which is where a lot of the action is taking place, to go on the company that I've invested in called Books. The $2 million deals in this, and these are big deals with universities. Yeah. You can't get a peep in the UK. But that's only, I think we're just out of phase by a year or two. I think the UK will eventually fold into the omelette. The Gates Foundation, by the way, have put adaptive learning and they've just spent a whole load of money on researching the learning market, put adaptive learning as their #1 target for investment, and put $20 million on the table in December. So it's not just me and Andy saying this. Guy at the back who are maybe vested interested in the companies, the Gates Foundation looked at this landscape and put this right at the top of their list.
I'd like to thank Donald and Andy for a really dynamic and fascinating presentation. Thank you very much.